So this video is for AQA economics and it's looking at paper 3 and the 10-mark question. Now, I've done a few videos on the 10-mark questions in the past. I've looked at certain years. This video is specifically going to look at the limitations of the data. So if you look at the level 3 grade descriptor as one of the key assessment objectives as part of evaluation, it says that you should show some appreciation of the limitations of the data. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean counter arguments. What it is requesting for you to do is scrutinize what has been given to you and how it has been presented. So limitations of the data refer to shortcomings, weaknesses, gaps in the data provided that may affect how reliable, valid, or meaningful your analysis or conclusions are. So my first tip to do with limitations is try to do your limitations later in your answer, perhaps even in your final judgment. And that allows you, or it makes sure that you've absorbed all the figures and you have a holistic insight. I tend to find students who do their limitations instantly within the first issue, it tends to be unconvincing. So, how best to offer such limitations? I've picked 3 observations from considering paper 3s over the years, and the first piece of advice I'm going to give you is look out for inconsistencies in the data. Now, what do I mean by inconsistencies in the data? I think it's probably best to give you ideas and give you examples. So one just kind of general example, I was having a look at a paper 3 the other day, and it was analysing data over time, and I was thinking, well, let's have a look at the consistency in the time intervals that were used. And in some cases, the time series data presented different periods within the same figure. So for example, one data series covered 5 years and another covered 10 years. Now, this inconsistency can lead to misleading conclusions. Comparisons over unequal time spans are not directly comparable and may distort trends or performances. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you an example from a case study where it actually shows you the figure. So, as we can see in this figure, you see these values and how they differ in times in terms of the year of when it was last sourced or updated. So if we look at, for example, Pakistan, their values are from 2010, whilst Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is 2016. So when comparing data across different countries, such as Pakistan, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, if the data is from different years, such as I said before, 2010 and 2016, then this creates a significant validation problem, and data from 2010 may not reflect the current realities, making it misleading to compare directly with 2016 data. Now, this is especially important when the years are in the same figure. Now, I have seen it before where some figures were from 2022 and other figures were from 2020. I would consider that to be acceptable because in certain measurements, there is a time lag, and the harder it is to obviously find the data, to analyze the data, you'd maybe expect that publication of the data to be later. But if it's in the exact same figure, so if we're, for example, looking at Gini index, and we've got Bangladesh and we've got Sri Lanka from a certain year, but we've got Pakistan's at a much earlier year, then that is misrepresenting the current situation. Now, my second observation is to consider what is missing from the data. So, for example, a figure has been presented to you, but within this figure, it may not give you the overall picture to answer the question. So let's imagine we have a figure which outlines the amount of investment projects taking place within a country, but yet it doesn't tell you the value of such projects. So like an example might be, the UK might be making less investments, but at a greater scale. But because we don't know the value of those investments, we are just basing it on the sheer number of projects taking place, which can be misleading. So again, let me give you an example from a past paper. So here we have a figure which has revenue and profits. Now, I remember when marking this question, a lot of students, a very, very common limitation was, oh, you can't calculate profits, which was an unconvincing limitation because actually you can. It's untrue. You can use revenue and profit margins to do so. The actual limitation, which not a lot of students really picked up, was if we have a look at the figure title for profit margins, it has the asterisk and it says before interest and tax. So the key limitation to this data is actually the information on those profit margins with interest and tax, because they're telling us it before, but why are they not giving it as it after? And could that be an issue? So if Boeing has more debts than Airbus, its interest payments would obviously be higher. So therefore, these earnings before interest and tax overstate its true profitability compared to Airbus. It also it excludes corporate taxes, and that can vary significantly based on geographic tax jurisdictions, government tax incentives, or just simply one-off charges or benefits. So if you think about Boeing, it's an American company, while Airbus is mostly French. So they're in completely different continents where there's going to be different tax systems and so on. So again, not having that information makes that data really, really misleading. And we've got another example. So this one is based on house prices. So it presents data on the average house price across regions, but it lacks important contextual information. So for example, we're not told about the average size of the property, the land area per house, or just simply variations in housing quality. So without these details, it's difficult to make meaningful comparisons or judgments based solely on price in terms of, in this question, who was better off, the Northeast or the Southeast. And a final example of a limitation in terms of what's missing is we've got GDP per head, we've got GDHI, but it's not stating whether it's in real terms or not. And because it's failing to provide us with that information, it's not providing us with full insight on purchasing power. So look to see what is missing from these figures. My final observation, so my third observation, refers to what is missing from AQA itself. So for example, what data would you have liked them to provide to give a better indication? So these are two examples. So firstly, could the data that is given be more specific, or is it just too general? So could it be segmented? Or is there missing economic indicators? For example, is the figures mostly on monetary measurements? So I've given you some kind of like limitation sentence starters. So to fully assess the impact, further data on this would have been helpful. Or clearly, to make a more informed judgment, additional data such as this would be necessary. So think about factors such as are they missing key measurements such as like the Happy Planet Index, or is it too focused on GDP? Does that give you the true indication of what the question's asking? Right, so I thought it might be useful in terms of this part of the video just to give you pretty much all the limitations of the previous years. So this is starting from 2018, but consider what is stated from the mark scheme. Get an idea. Some might be obscure, but remember, one good convincing limitation is enough for you to get full marks, as long as everything else hits the assessment objectives. So in 2018, obviously the lead examiners picked out 5 different limitations. Just by picking one of these limitations, it could have got you that final mark to make it full marks, to make it 10 out of 10. So then what we've also got is this one. So 2019, again, we can see a lot of limitations there. Feel free to pause the video and give them a read. 2020, as you can see, there was less within this year. There was only 3 on the mark scheme. 2021. 2022. And as you can see, this was an example that I used earlier. So no indication of the amount of interest each company pays on its debt or borrowing. 2023. So as it says here, the indicators of inequality are not current and values of Pakistan are more out of date than for Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Also says here, measures of human happiness have not been provided. And finally, 2024, last year's paper. So again, as you can see, there's no indication of environmental factors that might affect how well off people are. So that relates to that third observation. And again, as we can see here with the second observation, the data shows average house price, but does not give any indication of the size or quality of the average house in the 2 regions. So I hope this video gives you an idea about how to do the limitations of the data. Try not to spend too much time on this. I have seen students fall into the 10 mark trap, and the 10 mark trap is just spending far too long. Remember, it's roughly 1.5 minutes a mark. So with that 10 marker, if you're spending an additional, let's say 5 minutes coming up with an amazing limitation, just think about what you could do with those 5 minutes on, let's say, a 25 marker in this paper. So be strategic.